Iran and the Houthis in particular need a much better understanding of our seriousness when it comes to their destabilizing activity. Just because we aim for peace does not mean we look the other way when they take steps to make this war even worse.
Y le doy la palabra a la representante de los Estados Unidos.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Lowcock, thank you for your briefing, and Special Envoy Griffiths, the United States welcomes you to this council. You have taken on one of the world's most difficult diplomatic assignments, and we thank you for it. The United States fully supports your efforts to find a political solution to the conflict in Yemen. We especially appreciate that you have quickly reached out to all of the Yemeni parties involved. We hope that all parties will engage the UN without preconditions going forward. Yemen is an issue where it should be easy for all of us on this Security Council to agree. Yemen isn't Syria. We agree that there needs to be peace in Yemen, and that this war has taken a horrifying toll on the Yemeni people. Government services like schools, hospitals, and clean water barely exist anymore. This chaos is the perfect environment for terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS to find safe haven and plan attacks that could threaten us all. Finding peace is urgent, but pushing for peace also requires that we do not reward bad behavior. Iran and the Houthis in particular need a much better understanding of our seriousness when it comes to their destabilizing activity. Just because we aim for peace does not mean we look the other way when they take steps to make this war even worse. To achieve enduring peace in Yemen, Iran must stop its interference and its violations of the arms embargo this council imposed. Last week, the Houthis launched yet another round of ballistic missiles at Saudi Arabia. At the end of March, debris from a Houthi missile attack against the capital of Saudi Arabia killed a civilian. We have warned before that it was only a matter of time before the Houthi attacks caused civilian casualties in Saudi Arabia. Now that prediction has come true. Each day that goes by, the risks of greater regional conflict increase. And yet this council has not acted to hold the Houthis and Iran accountable for weapons that violate the arms embargo in Security Council Resolution 2216. We all went to Washington, D.C. to see these missiles firsthand, to see how the missiles found in Saudi Arabia originated in Iran. Then the independent and impartial UN panel of experts backed up when we showed you and confirmed Iran's non-compliance with Resolution 2216. The evidence is there, and it is strong. The Houthis didn't just figure out on their own how to build and fire ballistic missiles more than 1,000 kilometers to hit the Saudi capital. Iran is supporting them. This council taking action to stop the flow of arms to the Houthis would be a step forward, helping to resolve this war. The Houthis must realize that if they continue to use banned weapons in war, the international community will be united in condemning them. The United States supports the ability of our Saudi partners to defend their borders against these threats. We will continue pushing in this council for real accountability. The Houthis are showing no sign of stopping their missile launches toward Saudi Arabia. It is imperative that this council come together to make clear that these provocations are unacceptable. We hope that all parties, especially the Houthis, see the arrival of Mr. Griffiths as a chance to start down a new path. It is long past time for all parties to show flexibility and restraint in the service of a real negotiated settlement. I suspect that if we could hear from ordinary Yemenis, that's the same message they would be sending. The UN has emphasized the dire humanitarian stakes. The bottom line is that 18 million Yemenis do not know where their next meal will come from. Something has to change. That's why the United States emphasizes once again that all parties must do more to expand access for commercial goods and humanitarian aid to reach the Yemeni people. We are doing our part. We funded 4 mobile cranes for the Port of Hodeidah, which we expect will increase the flow of goods through that port. The United States also supports the UN verification and inspection mechanism as a tool that helps address the threat of weapons smuggling, while also helping get ships with legitimate cargo to Yemen. It is vital that the Port of Hodeidah remains open to commercial and humanitarian traffic, and we appreciate the steps that the parties have taken to keep the port functioning. Beyond reaching the port, aid workers should be able to move freely throughout the country to deliver the humanitarian assistance to those in need. The United States has also joined donors in taking steps to respond to this humanitarian crisis. We have announced almost $87 million in humanitarian aid to Yemen this fiscal year. We applaud Saudi Arabia and the UAE in particular for putting forward almost $1 billion toward the UN's humanitarian response. As long as the war continues, the parties must take care in the way they plan and carry out attacks to reduce human suffering on the ground. We have called on all parties to take appropriate measures to mitigate the risk of civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. The United States is working to offer support to the Saudi-led coalition while minimizing civilian casualties. The Houthis must halt their indiscriminate shelling and ensure that humanitarian aid is delivered without any diversion or delays. The war in Yemen is at a critical turning point. We have a new envoy ready to promote peace. This council can take steps to address the Houthi ballistic missile provocations, promote humanitarian access, and support a return to talks. These are the goals that all of us ought to share, so we should not hesitate to take action as a Security Council to achieve them. That means not being afraid to call out the Houthis and their Iranian patrons by name in future resolutions. That means actually leaning on the parties to negotiate in good faith in the UN process. That means responding generously to the UN's humanitarian appeals and standing by our demands for unfettered humanitarian access. If we do these things, we can lay the groundwork for an enduring political settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you again, Undersecretary Lowcock, for your briefing. As always, you inform us and put the gravity of Syria's humanitarian situation in perspective. First, given all of the interesting accusations we heard earlier, I want to make a few points crystal clear. The 75 members of the global coalition to defeat ISIS joined forces to liberate people from ISIS control in Iraq, and the coalition continues our campaign to eradicate ISIS in Syria. Despite the difficulty of this task, our operations have succeeded in rolling back the so-called ISIS caliphate and addressing a dire threat to our collective peace and security. The coalition made these gains while the Assad regime and its backers focused their guns mostly on the Syrian opposition groups that weren't ISIS terrorists. While we went after ISIS and actually achieved lasting gains for the Syrian people, the Assad regime was busy bombarding civilians in places like Aleppo, Idlib, and eastern Ghouta. The coalition's operations were carried out in scrupulous regard for the laws of war and to minimize civilian casualties. In Raqqa, our partners conducted a neighborhood-by-neighborhood evacuation of civilians ISIS had trapped in the city. The United States will once again put on the record that UN humanitarian convoys are welcome at any time in Raqqa or Ruhban. We welcome this assistance and are ready to do everything that we can to assist it. As Undersecretary General Lowcock noted, a UN interagency team successfully carried out an assessment in Raqqa just 2 weeks ago. In Ruhban, coalition forces are also acting to support humanitarian efforts and have worked with the UN and other partners to provide requested details on operational security and medevacs. The bottom line is that the United States is ready to support humanitarian deliveries. The delay, as always, continues to be whether the Assad regime will grant permission for the UN's convoys to move. We keep hearing in this chamber about mine clearance in Raqqa. Removing unexploded ordnance is one of our top priorities when it comes to stabilizing the area. So far, we have cleared almost 3,000 explosive remnants of war. We have cleared almost 300 critical infrastructure sites, provided mine risk education for 40,000 people, and trained over 120 Syrians to conduct demining operations. This task is not easy, thanks to the quantity of munitions ISIS left behind. But we recognize this work is vital to ensure Syrians can return home safely. On top of mine clearance in Raqqa, we have provided more than $50 million in food and non-food items to the most vulnerable. For example, we have given close to 300,000 pounds of food and 151 million liters of water to more than 195,000 people. I could go on and talk about the schools and medical clinics we've supported or our efforts to restore electricity. We would be happy to brief our fellow council members at any time on these details. The issue is that we're not here to educate ourselves about the global coalition to defeat ISIS's work in Raqqa and our continued efforts to facilitate cross-line delivery into Ruhban. Russia has called us here as part of a messaging campaign to try to distract from the atrocities committed by the Assad regime. In order to do that, Russia has asked this council to focus its attention on the one part of Syria where the Assad regime isn't pummeling civilians to death with barrel bombs or banned chemical weapons. Consider what has taken place since the Security Council demanded a ceasefire in Resolution 2401. On February 24th, the Council demanded a halt to the fighting in Syria. Instead, the same day the resolution was adopted, the Assad regime flagrantly disregarded it. The Assad regime and its backers ignored this council and launched an all-out campaign to seize eastern Ghouta. This campaign culminated with the use of chemical weapons against innocent men, women, and children. Over 151,000 civilians were displaced. Now fighting is escalating in northwestern Syria. Between April 2nd and April 7th, Syrian and Russian airstrikes damaged 4 medical facilities in this part of the country, a disturbing repeat of previous circumstances. Between mid-March and early April, airstrikes reportedly killed another 188 civilians and injured 120 others. In addition to a ceasefire, the Council has also called again and again for unhindered humanitarian access in Syria. However, since the beginning of 2018, the Syrian authorities have only allowed 6 cross-line interagency convoys to deliver humanitarian aid. 6. That is just 5% of the cross-line assistance requested by the UN. More than ever, we need to focus on ensuring that this Council's demand for a ceasefire and for unhindered humanitarian access actually get implemented on the ground. But that would require the Assad regime to stop its brutal campaign against the Syrian people, and the countries with influence over Assad to join us in demanding that the Assad regime stop its senseless slaughter of the Syrian people. The United States will not stop focusing on the ways to achieve that goal, no matter how many times our Russian colleagues convene these cynical, thinly disguised diversions. Thank you.